3 was VRF, and then option 4 was a more of a scaled down version of using heat pump technology and doing air source cooling with electric heat backup.
Okay. Okay, so I don't want to belabor this, but a couple things. So we just got to be careful. Yes, there are incentives, there are rebates, et cetera, but the 30% credit that allows some projects to go through or make sense financially, we don't have because we don't pay taxes. So we don't get that 30% credit. So that's not an incentive for us in this case. We're going to pay for it, get some rebates, et cetera, get some payback as far as energy costs. But I think that's probably how you do the math on this one. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, as far as what we're looking at, is there a difference between everything that Arrow Street is looking at for sustainability between the 2-grade school and the 4-grade school, or would you there's no difference? It doesn't matter whether it's 2 or 4. We really are looking at this, doing the same thing sustainability wise, or are there things that are applicable to one and not the other?
I'd say it's applicable to all. What we were really trying to get a handle on was which way you were leaning at this point. As Chris described, we sort of narrowed it down, but there are no decisions have been made, right? Okay. We're just trying to understand what your goals are so that we can begin to have more conversations to fine tune those and to have more accurate information in the next estimate.
Okay. Chris, would you agree that the geothermal, the closed loop geothermal is going to be a very expensive proposition?
It is, but I also think that the rebates, whether we pay taxes on it or not, are still available. I see many schools that do not pay taxes reap the benefits of the incentive programs that are out there. So I think it's definitely a viable option if the rebates and the funding back to us is available. Yes. Okay. As long term, from a mechanical standpoint, from an equipment standpoint, from energy usage to serviceability and long-term maintenance, I think we're putting infrastructure in place that's going to support the school for 25 to 30 plus years. And for future expansion for Trottier, if we add more wells and want to make the field bigger, I think Mark brought it up in one of the meetings that can we ever add Trottier onto the loop? And that's a total possibility. Yes. Yep. Okay. I think it's and for the community one, if you're showing that we're going into this all in with the reducing our carbon footprint and the focus around sustainability and reduction of greenhouse gases. Yeah, I think it's a plus for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Larry, I saw your hand go up during that. Is that in response to anything that was being discussed here, or a totally separate topic?
No, I just wanted to correct a few things. So our estimator told us the geothermal system would be about 6.7 million. So Kathy, you're correct about that. But however, that is geothermal systems are eligible for incentive programs, both through Mass Save as well as the energy investment tax credit. And we went through a pretty careful evaluation of that with this subcommittee, looking at the difference between the ground source heat pumps, the air source heat pumps, both for the 310 enrollment and this, should be 305 enrollment and the 610 enrollment, which we can get to folks posted afterwards if that's helpful. But it's definitely, incentives are available. Our evaluation was about 4.78 million worth of incentives for the 305 enrollment, and sorry for a minute, about 6.78 incentives for the 610 enrollment. So and we are doing life cycle cost analysis where we're comparing the overall cost of the system, both geothermal and air source heat pump. And the other system that we're looking at is VRF system, variable refrigerant. Those are essentially heat pump systems, you have oftentimes use them for residential applications. It's not necessarily something that is well suited, particularly for larger spaces like a cafeteria or gym. We looked at that, and the committee was, I think, rightfully skeptical, but we're still going to keep all the systems in play for the moment. And we'll come back to both the committee as well as this committee, the subcommittee as well as this committee, to talk things through further.
Thanks, Larry. Someone other than Kathy had their hand up. I think it was Roger. So Roger, did you? Or someone did?
I did, but other than just feigning surprise that even though I'm on the same committee that Chris and Mark are, that Kathy didn't want to ask me any technical questions. But I do recall the numbers that Larry actually just went ahead and covered anyway. I saw his hand up, so I don't think I have anything to add to what he said. It's definitely way up in the seven figures, but because some of these credits, if you will, are applied to the entire project, that it seemed to eat away at quite substantially at the net cost.
Okay, Kathy.
Larry, can you send me the calculation that you guys are looking at as far as what you think the incentives are? And I'm not trying to beat a dead horses, but we don't get credits. The school system is part of the town. The town doesn't get credits because we pay no income tax, federal or state. So I don't see how we get $6 million of incentives against something that costs $6 million, but I hope you're right. I just like to see what they are. I know about the mass save credits, our rebates. That's cash. This comes back. Whatever you pay, they give you a piece of it. But I've never seen anything close to 100% rebate as far as a system like this. So I just like to see what you think that the incentives are, because I think that is an important part of this decision. As far as what the net cost is.
I agree with you. As far as we understand the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, allows nonprofit and communities to pick up the incentives which were previously tax credits.
Okay, so
direct-
you
as direct
obviously know
payments.
something I don't know, so I'm just gonna stop talking. I just like to.
Yeah, Kathy, I can confirm that as well.
Yeah, you're correct. Yep.
So,
But I think still to Kathy's request, though, I think, Larry, if you can just get kind of where they're coming from, just because I think it'd be important for Kathy and the finance subcommittee to get their arms around this too.
Sure. Yep.
Especially if it's included in some of our cost estimates, but we haven't taken the quote unquote benefit anywhere for this. I think it's important for them to have with and without numbers.
Sure. Yeah, Jason, what we can do is send you the presentation we made to the subcommittee, and then you can distribute it to everyone else. And buried in there, and I can reference the page numbers, is the calculations that Kate in our office prepared.
Perfect. I see there's a hand up on the public side. We're not at a point of public comment, so we're going to keep going, and there will be an opportunity at the end of the meeting to come back to any comments. The next, we're going to go to the Skanska and Arrow Street update. So, Kate, I'll give you and Jim access to screen share. Sorry, Katie. And I'll let you two take it wherever you want to go once you have that access. And I'll just, for purposes of the agenda, under this, we will be discussing site studies, follow-up from the prior meeting, swing space availability, Woodward concept studies, updated program requirements, and a schedule review and update.
So site studies we had listed on here in case there were any outstanding questions that had come up in our review last week. I don't recall anything that wasn't answered. Obviously, we're going to continue to review the site, and we're digging in and getting more and more information. But I don't think there's anything particular that we need to update from the last time. We were making sure that we had it covered in case there were topics from last week.
So let me just open it to the committee.
Okay.
And Mark, I know you took it to do and sent it to Board of Health and DPW on the sites. And it sounds like a meeting might be in the works there for you to meet with them and talk through kind of any next steps there. I guess, are there other committee members that have questions, comments, or concerns related to the site at this point and what we've heard to date? I'll go to Mark.
Yeah, just a quick note. I did send the letter out to the Board of Health and DPW. I think, Jason, we circulated back to you a copy of the 2023 report of the testing. And in my letter, I've requested the 2024 report because if you look at the dates, it has to be done on an annual basis, and we're already past that annual. So that test may very well have been done. If Mark Purple is still here, he is. I may want to call you. Roger and I were made aware of some town meeting warrant articles going back to the late 90s. And there's a lot of flawed information that we're finding over this, but we might need to do an in-depth search at town hall for some of the old records. But I'm waiting to hear back from Bill Cundiff at DPW and Board of Health, just to get a meeting together so that we can outline questions. And then come back. We may want to get deeper into this. I just don't know. But Mark, I'll give you a call tomorrow and kind of outline what I've found and where we could go with this.
Okay, sounds good.
Other questions, comments on the site other than the sub-work stream that Mark is working on?
I think Mark touched on it or will touch on it, but I'm still concerned about I know we came up with a septic location possible. But is that all we need? Do we need a backup site? And have we done, perk testing to prove that it is, usable, right? I mean, before I would buy a lot to build a house, I would make sure that it would be able to have perk testing and be able to put a septic in. So that's my only other concern. Might be worth spending some money on some testing to make sure.
So Arrow Street, what's your latest plan there and recommendation?
We don't currently have any perk testing planned. It wasn't part of the scope that was defined in our studies to date. We'd be happy to line that up if that's a big concern, but it would be outside of the current contract. We did receive the information about how much it would cost, so we have a general idea of that, and we would be happy to line that up.
I'd ask that you send it to myself and Kathy can run it through the routine of the finance subcommittee. And then if it needs to come back to the full board, we can.
Okay.
I would assume you would need to decide where on the site the actual physical building and the size of the building that's going there is gonna be, so that you know where to test for the perk testing. Is that, I may be stating the obvious, but like, what do you need to know? If we say we want to do it, what do you need to know to actually do the testing?
I'd imagine our first conversation would be with our civil engineers because they know the most about where would be a good location for it. They have the information that we've received so far about the soil and the topography, and that they would likely have a good concept of where it should be. I think we would inform them of where we're looking at placing the building. We are starting to progress some of our option studies as well that might also help inform, where might be a good spot on the site that's not going to be used for something else. But where we pinpointed just off the cuff was next to the current system, because it seems like, it has very good percolation. So, you know, if the site around it is similar, that's why we thought it might be a good spot. So I think working with our experts, we could narrow it down a little bit more.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, according to what Katie gave to us, the current system is okay for up to 522 occupants, if I remember the number correctly. So, you know, someone could assume that if we're gonna go to the lower enrollment and keep it as a 2-grade school, maybe the septic is all right. I would be one to say we're sitting there with a nearly 30-year-old system. We're at the end of life. We should not be making a 50-year investment without knowing that we can put a septic system in. For 610 or whatever the two numbers are. I think it's something we just need to do and determine whether or not that's a feasible part of the site. So I personally would assume that the current system is done. And in order for us to preserve the value, we should explore where else it could go.
If I could add to that, the location is not so much driven by the building or the footprint of the building. The location is driven by what is good soil to perk. And we could share the screen again, but it was sort of upland from the bottom of the bowl, as Mark mentioned and Katie mentioned, sort of adjacent to the existing. If it perked in the same amount, you could have one that's about the same size or slightly larger. The work to do it now would involve digging a test pit, pouring some water in, seeing how fast that water perks. One of the questions we had raised, and I don't know, Mark, if you can chat with the DPW, if they have someone with a backhoe, that could reduce the cost to the town of hiring somebody to come in with a backhoe. But otherwise, I think our number was about $5,000 plus or minus to have somebody come in essentially for a day, dig a few holes, pour the water in, test out a few spots. And if that was something that made sense, we can get a more refined proposal out to Jason, to you and Kathy.
Okay. Anything else on the site? Why don't you go wherever you want to go next, Katie?
The next thing we had was about the availability of swing space. I may defer to Greg at some point. Do you want to take this, Greg, or do you want me to?
Sure.
Okay.
So the principal team, Keith Mavoy, Becky, and I did speak about swing space during a potential construction project. So we set 3 goals. 1, to maintain the integrity of the student experience during the construction phase, ensure safety, and minimize transitions. So what we're investigating is potentially using Fin and having K1, 2 as for the grade 2, having Woodward be 3, 4, and 5 as one potential solution, with impacts to the educational program, not having the same space required for specials such as music, art, world language, but that would be for a short duration of time. And the second option we're exploring is K1, 2 at Finn, 3, 4 at Woodward, and potentially grade 5 at Trotter. Again, we're still in the investigation mode, looking at impacts and using the 3 goals that we've set as kind of the targets to try to determine what the most optimum solution would be. So we're still in progress.
Questions on that? Okay, next item.
Next, we were going to talk about the test fit for Woodward. So folks have asked, as we've talked, especially about the 610 enrollment. So that would be grades 2 through 5 at Neary. That would all the students fit in the Woodward building? So we just did some quick test fit studies, which I will share my screen. Just getting my screen set up here. There we go. So this is the ground floor. This is assuming that it is only the Southborough pre-K students, that the Northborough pre-K students would be moving back to Northborough. So there are 3 pre-K classrooms. Then we have the 7 kindergarten classrooms. And then you'll see on the second floor, this is the grade 1. So it's looks like it's sort of just about the right number of classrooms. The rooms that kindergarten and pre-K would be moving into are the classrooms that exist right now, as they are fitted out currently. We were purely counting the number of classrooms and would that student population fit into the Woodward building if we went with a 4-grade configuration.
But you have not obviously considered what retrofitting may be needed due to the age of the children in that space.
That's correct. This is purely numbers of classrooms. If it were the 4-grade configuration, any work to Woodward would be outside of this project. Obviously it could be done, but we were just, this is a preliminary study.
So leaving cost aside, are there any concerns you have at this point, looking at this?
None that I see. This puts the lowest grade, the youngest students on the lowest level of the school, which is usually optimal for not going up and down too many stairs, that sort of a thing. But just from the number of students and the number of classrooms necessary, it seems to work.
There are other questions from the committee? Go ahead, Kathy.
So Greg, how are you going to, what is the process to determine what would need to be done to move the young children to Woodward?
So we would look at requirements from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Look at their any requirements they have. Also speak with our early childhood coordinator and principal Ryan, and also look at other spaces and other schools that have a similar configuration. Not all preschools or kindergarten schools have bathrooms within the classroom setting. So that's not necessarily an obstacle. And it's not a necessary expense to have lavatories in every classroom. And then just looking at the height of sinks, any furniture in the classroom would be the second thing. So those are the areas that we're pursuing and working with DESE and our experts within the district.
When do you think you'll have that answered so that it can be quantified and costed?
I don't think it's a large task. I think we can within probably the end of July.
I just don't want to overlook it because, you know, when we did the study of Woodward, when we thought that Woodward might become a town asset and turned into, you know, used for town uses and senior center, et cetera. I believe, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the cost to do that was 10 million or so. So I assume that this is a lot less, but still something we need to get our arms around.
in the right ballpark. It's obviously dated at this point.
Yeah. So it's 20 million now.
Don't say that.
Well,
Denise?
Yeah, my question is, we talked about swing sites using Woodward and then using Finn. When that happens, when do we address, if we are using Woodward as a swing site, when do we address reconfiguring this so the kids get to move in there? How does that logistic work?
I think that would be part of our move-in phase when construction project is completed and working with Arrow Street. Obviously, the phase from Finn to Woodward, it's not as if we wouldn't have Finns. We would have some time to be able to make sure that we're moving students at a time when it's optimal. But I think that is all work to be considered and planned out and mapped out.
Okay. A lot of logistics to deal with. Thank you.
Kathy, your hand still up or okay. Anything else on the Woodward preliminary concept? So Greg, just to make sure we round out that to do, you think that you first want to finish your quote unquote swing space analysis, and then depending on where that lands, we'll have to figure out whether there's any costing exercise needed on this analysis.
Yeah, and we can run.
You muted yourself.
So we can run those in parallel.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Katie. Where do we want to go next? Program requirements or schedule?
I think we can go to schedule.
Yeah, I can run through the schedule here real quick. All right. So we are obviously the 24th, and our next meeting will be on July 10th. And then, as we stated in the previous meeting, we do have 2 dates on July 5th and July 18th, where we will be voting and selecting an option. So it's going to be a busy couple of weeks here. We do have a bit of a break over the 4th. Just as a heads up, the MSBA comments have not come back. We've pinged them a couple of times and they said they're in the works. So just that's on our current schedule. So yeah, so obviously we have the community forum. We have the week of the 4th come back, another building committee, and then that week of the 15th and 18th really is an important phase of the project. And then obviously all going towards the August 27th date to submit the PSR to the MSBA.
Do you get an extension on your due date back to the MSBA, given it looks like it's at least a week behind at this point?
We get 14 calendar days. Katie and I were discussing that as well. So as soon as it comes back, we have 14 calendar days to get it back to them.
Do you expect going to be committee action needed there, or just potentially time from the school administration?
So there can be committee action, but I think we should, it's typically the bulk of the comments. There definitely will be a lot for Greg and his team because they usually come back with a lot of comments on the ed program, clarifying questions. So I can't say a hard yes or no, depending on those comments that come back. So we're just gonna have to wait and see until the questions come back. And then we can look at that again, if there are particular questions that we do want to bring in from the building committee, how that shakes out with our current schedule. So.
Hi, Kathy.
Andrew Pfaff is still on this, right? So we both have a problem with July 10th. We've got a joint advisory select board meeting that night. And we're only given 2 nights to have this meeting. We either have the 10th or the 11th, and we picked the 10th. I don't know why I didn't think about this being a problem. So can you just check and make sure you're going to have a quorum without us, Jason, on the 10th?
Well, I care whether we have a quorum or not. I care more about the importance of the decisions that we're going to be discussing,
Yeah.
especially given the bodies that you two represent. So let me ask it this way. Is the select board meeting on July 9th?
No.
So would the committee have any reservations, and our consulting team, because I don't know what your calendars look like, pulling it back? Because I actually probably cannot do the 9th or the 10th now, but you can proceed without me if you have to. So I think it's important to meet that week, but we could also go back as early as the 8th if we think there's something to discuss. I guess I'm looking to our consultant team first to forecast what that agenda looks like. What are you doing between tonight, the 24th, and that date?
That is going to be, we're going to do a lot of development of the 3 options that we're going to be including in the PSR. You'll see on the week after, we're going to be asking for some guidance on which option is preferred. So we're going to be creating a lot of content between now and then that we would like to review with you the week before we're asking you to make any kind of decisions.
Will you be ready as early as the 8th or no?
We could show you what we have by then. I'm sure. I mean, we're going to be working diligently for the 2 weeks that we're not meeting. So we'll have lots of content. That way we could also have some time in between for follow-up if things come up in that, you know, if we met on the 8th, let's say, and you had some questions or some things some feedback that we would want to react to, that would give us, you know, until the week after to be able to do that. So, and I think that's reasonable.
Jason, did you just say you're not going to be here on the 10th either?
The 9th is gonna be more of an issue than the 10th. The 10th I'll be fine with, if we're starting at 7:30. Because I didn't know, like, is your meeting a long meeting, Kathy, or no?
Yeah, it starts at 6:30 and then select board starts at 6:30 and then advisory joins at 7:30. And there's a few meaty things we're talking about, so it'll go to at least 8:30, maybe 9.
So you're doing more of the budget transfers and reserve fund, is what
Yeah,
it sounds
more
like.
of that, yeah, so yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll leave it to the committee then. Do we want to do the 8th or the 11th? And I'll come back to the community forum in a second. So does anyone have any strong objections to the 8th?
No.
And
So
we
I
are
think
voting on the 15th as far as the option. That's our date. 2 weeks from now, 2.5 weeks from now.
if we're ready.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or the 18th, correct?
Yeah, we currently have two meetings scheduled to either continue the conversation or if there's a decision made on the 15th. But yep.
And
Okay.
when do we get the revised estimates?
So that's what I was just going to add is this is based, the dates here are building backwards from sending the information to the estimator on the 19th. And then you'll see on the next calendar is when we receive them back. So we get them back on August 6th. And that's the amount of time that they need to, that the drawings and provide an estimate.
Okay, so are you saying, Katie, that what comes back on the 6th is the one estimate? Because we've already voted on the choice at that point?
They are going to, yes, they're going to estimate the preferred option.
But we're not going to get any more estimates on our 2 options right now. We've got what we're going to get.
From what we had in the PDP, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I just got to say, at this point in time, I don't have enough information to vote on an option by the 10th. I'm not comfortable with the level of estimates we've gotten. I'm not comfortable with the site information. I'm not comfortable with the perk testing. I'm not comfortable in knowing, you know, geothermal and all the other stuff that's outstanding. I think we're trying to cram this in. And at this point in time, I would vote to push it off to the next MSBA meeting.
So Arrow Street, what goes in? I mean, first of all, we need to give you the opportunity to present to us on the 8th. I think it'd be more appropriate to react then to understand whether we're going to be ready or not, because I think we need to give you a chance to present that stuff. I think the committee should certainly, as part of this discussion, Andrew just laid out, I think, 4 or 5 items, right? Of those items, what go, like, do we decide on, for example, geothermal? Is that something that goes into this PSR, or is that something you continue to work through and refine while the MSB assesses the PSR for size of school, functionality, stuff like that? I think that's what I think the committee may need a little education on, is when they vote, if they're ready to vote in mid-July, what essentially are they voting on at that point? But then with the understanding that their cost estimator is going to take that vote and go and do their work, what happens if the work that comes back from the cost estimator is not in line with what people were expecting based on where we were at the last cost estimate and any work you've done in the interim? So I think, can you walk everyone through that? I'm not, you may or may not get people more comfortable, but just how you typically work through this and what we should be focused on and what maybe is an item we shouldn't be as focused on. Obviously, the site is something you have to be, very focused on and comfortable with. But you heard Andrew's comment, so I'll let you react.
Yeah, if I could jump in, the site issues I think are important that everybody feels comfortable with, to understand what information you have available to you to make that decision, what information you think you need to make that decision, and how we can best support that. Between the 2 new build options is a significant amount of dollars, and really that's the question, is to what extent does a slight change in the dollars, let's say, of the 610 enrollment, make that more or less attractive than the 305 enrollment? So it's really a question that, the cost differential between the 2 may not be as important, or maybe more important to you than the cost differential that we're saying now it's worth, where it is at this moment in terms of the cost. So that's something to think through. The geothermal is certainly something we can carry as an ad alternate, which is how we carried it at the PDP level. And we can continue to carry that. That doesn't really impact your concept or option, whether you want a 4-grade school or a 2-grade school, whether you're doing a new build or whether you're doing a renovation. So those sorts of questions aren't necessarily ones that you have to make decisions on at this point. And then the cost at the moment, we've done some looking at what happens with the less space in the program. And I think you have those numbers, Katie, we can walk through folks with tonight, which will help to give an understanding. So for the slight reduction in programs, or about 10% or so, 8 to 10%, it reduces the costs incrementally.
Andrew, do you have subsequent thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking in my head, I mean, I feel like there's other outstanding takeaways that I at least had, that, I asked to see is there an option for a 2-level, 2-grade school? What if we kept a portion of the old school? There's a lot of, I just feel like I've asked some questions that were takeaways that I've not gotten responses to, that without more information, I just don't feel comfortable.
So if I could answer the one part about the single level or the double level, those are going to be represented in the options that we're going to be presenting starting on the 8th. So we are continuing to look at those, but those are, coming up next week effectively, or in 2 weeks. So we're continuing to sort of work those things in parallel. Sorry, you asked a first question. I've already blanked on what it was.
Yeah, and you have a double level for a 2-grade configuration, not just a 4?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
There's certain spaces that sort of lend themselves to being a single level, like the gym and things like
Yeah,
that. But everything else, we could look at, how we can consolidate that, onto a smaller footprint. because I know exactly why you're asking that. There's some pros and cons to, concrete versus steel. And that's one of the things that we're going to be pursuing as we're looking at these options. So we haven't shown you the options in a little while, and that's what we want to show you then, is a little bit more progression of it, so that you can start to understand, where we're pushing those from, the more simple diagrams that we had before, showing a little bit of simple massing so you can see how it stacks up on the site. And exactly to what you're asking right there, Andrew, does it make sense to stack it up so that there's a smaller footprint? So that's one of the things we're going to be studying.
Catherine?
So I just want to piggyback or reiterate or ditto what Andrew Pfaff just said a minute ago. One of the, this I'm speaking for me, one of the main criteria, if not the criteria for me to decide between new 2, new 4, is the cost. And therefore, I just don't see how we don't spend more time drilling down on what we think the cost is. If we rely on the estimates that were done for the PDP, we've talked about a lot since then that the estimator didn't know about. We've talked about lots of site problems. We've talked about now geothermal. We've talked about things that he or she could not possibly have known when they put the estimate together. So I just keep looking at this estimate as just a really rough number that I would like to see it refined much further and have refined estimates to look at before we make a decision. I don't see how I can make a decision either with what I know now in a couple of weeks. There's just too much. I don't understand. I know there's a big contingency built into the estimates. I'm hoping the contingency is wrong, that we don't need that. So because it's so big, we've got to make every effort to get it down before we go much further. If we were, if we had a project cost that made sense, fit right in with our debt structure, replace debt that has rolled off, fine. Maybe I wouldn't be concerned, but this is not the case here. This is really, really big as far as our debt structure. We go from one extreme to the other. So I don't see how I can make a decision in a couple of weeks without truly thinking we've got really good estimates for both choices, 2 and 4.
So Katie, Larry, what if the committee got to a point, I'm just gonna throw out a theoretical, let's just say most of the site questions get resolved. There will always be questions and we need to acknowledge that, right? But they get resolved to a level of comfort that we're ready to proceed on the site. Is there any reason we can't run a dual path on the 2 versus 4 grade, or at least get to a certain level of comfort before taking a vote? Right? Like it may mean you take 2 extra weeks between, call it that second week in July and the last week. But I think we obviously have numbers that are roughly $30-ish million apart, roughly, right? Like it depends on how you look at the 2 versus 4 grade. It sounds like at least 2 members are saying they really need to know if that 30 is real, right? We're even starting with the right base, right? The base is a 2 grade configuration. So just hearing that feedback, and you may say you want to think about it and come back, but obviously we're not meeting technically for a couple of weeks, but we could call a quick short meeting if you want after this. But I think that's the bridge we need to help create, because obviously our goal here, right, is to create support, right, in cohesion on a path forward, not obviously have more questions than answers.
Well, I guess let us talk to the estimator about, so the question really is, our anticipated was we would send some drawings to the estimator July 19th, and they would return to us, I forget the date, but late July 29th, something like that.
We'll send it on the 19th of
Sorry, we get it
July
back the
and-
6th.
Correct.
And to the extent that the committee says, well, we can't make a vote till we get those estimates back, then we're really looking to say, okay, we're going to vote on this sometime after Wednesday the 7th for submission of the PSR to the MSBA, let's say that August 27th, we try to stay on that board cycle. That would give you an updated estimate. I think the question you're sort of asking is, can we get the 610 enrollment maybe a little less expensive, and that makes it more palatable if it was 28 million instead of 30 million?
No, I mean, Andrew and Kathy can weigh in here. I think the question is, are we working with the right base project? When I talk about a base project, I talk about replacing a 2-grade school, right? Are we starting with the right starting point, right? And then what is the economy of scale to go from 2 to 4? Like that's what people are looking to try to make a decision off of, at least from what I'm hearing so far here. And obviously you're not doing detailed design work at this point, right? So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, when you come in front of us on the 8th, right? Andrew's thrown out a few ideas on design, et cetera. I'm sure you have other things we don't even know you're thinking about. Are you gonna, like, the designs you put in front of us on a 2 versus a 4-grade configuration on that evening, are those designs subject to our feedback, ready for the estimator then? Or
Yes,
what else would you be doing between the 8th and the following week on those 2 designs to get it ready to go to the estimator?
So we're trying to react to comments from the committee, as well as whatever additional development we're trying to do at our end.
So I guess what I would ask you to think about, just hearing at least 2 members' concerns, and obviously we have a line forming here, is, can we push back the committee's decision date, right? Unless the committee says, no, we don't really like we see something, we don't like something on the 8th, right? If the committee still is indecisive mainly because of cost, right? I realize there's a whole separate site discussion. Leave that off to the side for a second. But if the committee is indecisive because they need to understand the cost better of the design that was put in front of us, but we know that we're not willing to eliminate either a 2 or a 4 grade at that point, why wouldn't you just send it to the estimator a little earlier and allow us to react on the back end of that, while still doing whatever work we need to do to get a few folks, if there's items on the site, et cetera. I think we're still working the same timeline, but not forcing the committee to make a decision in mid-July. But I want to make sure you're going to have enough detail to actually get the right estimate, sort of thing. Like, it's kind of flipping it around, but obviously you put this together and you do this all the time, so there's some rationale for why you had that calendar. But I'll let you react to that question, then I'll kind of go down the line here with the hands that are up.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, because the work we're doing, pushing and pulling the schemes at this point, is pretty rough. And the question would be, how much refinement goes into it before it's estimated? I think in the end of the day, we could do that. I think we should look at things on the 8th, and we can sort of, as a group, decide, yeah, those seem appropriate. Let's go ahead and estimate those, in which case we'd get that back sooner. Simultaneously, I think we will talk to, and we can do that tomorrow, let's say, talk to the estimator and get a little better sense of timing at their end.
All right. Kathy and Andrew, you can react to that one as we go down the line to see if that may be more palatable. But Chris, I'll go to you first.
So my biggest thing is, and I'm probably speaking for Arrow Street here, and they could jump in. They're at SD level. They're presenting schematic designs for an estimator to do conceptual estimates and to, make assumptions. Until we further progress on decision making and what we're actually going to do, there's going to be that unknown. So we have to understand that, and there's going to be a big unknown on a lot of mechanical systems, finishes, just everything in line with that. We got to remember that there's a lot of concepts out there and a lot of different proposals for student count, everything. It's just right now it's very early on, and when we do go to the market and buy this thing out, if the timing is right, that, like all the big schools do and colleges do, if the market's right and contractors are hungry, we're gonna get real competitive numbers if we play our cards right. So we got to remember that. We got to remember the level of detail that the estimators have to work with. Right now, there's a lot of not to lack of better terms, wishy-washy design or things that we want to do. We just don't have a solid plan. So the estimators are going to be conservative, and we got to remember that. Until we tighten the actually what we're going to do, then we're going to probably see some tightening up the numbers, and we gotta solidify a plan here.
Kathy?
So, Chris, I agree with everything you said, and I get that part. The problem is that I'm not sure this town can afford the 4-grade school project and maybe not even the 2-grade school project. And so until I can get to that point, and that's why, unlike other projects where, a lot of times you start with a budget, right? We didn't start with a budget. We started with a concept of trying to build the best school we could, given what the world looks like today and how you educate kids the best way possible. So all laudable. But we still in this committee haven't sat down and said things like, do we need to get rid of the auditorium? We just can't do it. We don't have one now. We just can't do it. We've got one at Trotter. We're just going to have to live with that. We haven't had that discussion. So I thought we were going to spend the summer trying to pare down some of the square footage. I know we've got some of it off, but it's not very much. So I just got too many questions. When you look at the last 10 MSBA funded projects, you see costs that look different than ours. They're significantly different in most cases. They're less. We've gone from what I thought was $750 a square foot to $1,250 a square foot. I just can't get my arms around this with this little information that we have. So I've got to get a better handle on what these numbers really will be, knowing that, yes, we've got to go through these steps later on to truly fine tune it, but we've got to have a better idea of what this project is going to cost now just because of the size of it. If it was $50 million, Chris, I'd be fine, but it's not. I mean, this is just a project like none we've ever seen as far as cost goes.
I agree, but if I were to ask you today, if I asked you today, what are we building? Could you tell me?
No, I'm really focused on the cost as far as what we're building.
No,
I will say
exactly.
this. I mean, I get the difference. I wish we could do the 4-grade school. I get that you get a lot better result education wise. I get the transitions. I also see the economy of scale between the 2 and the 4-grade. I understand that it's not double, nowhere near double. So I get all that. So I'd love to build the 4-grade school. I just don't see how we do this in this town. I really don't.
I agree, but put yourself in the designer and estimator's shoes. If you were to ask them, what we're building today, we don't really have an answer. So how much effort's being spent on exactly what we're doing? If you think about it that way, probably not a lot, because we haven't narrowed it down. We haven't solved that problem yet. We don't know what we're building. And think about that. Once we know, I think everyone will put a lot of effort into narrowing down and tightening up the cost. And there's a lot that goes into estimating and putting these budgets together. I've been on the other side of it. It's, until you get a solidified plan, I think that's going to come in and things will be tightened up once I think us as collectively as a team, we need to figure out what we need to build. We really do.
Kathy, you go with me going to Denise? Her hand's down. Denise?
I agree with Chris. I want to remind everybody too, that we talked at the beginning about the education and what we want to build. Is it reflective of what we want to see as education in the school, in this town? Do we want to see our kids being moved every 2 years, or we're trying to get away from that? We're trying to build something that, yes, is cost effective and respective of the tax rate, but also in the same vein, respective of what the educational support. We have the occasion to do this now. So I agree with Chris completely. I think that We don't know what we're building yet. We need to zero down on what that is educationally as well as financially before we can make appropriate decisions. Thank you.
Andrew?
I think for me, I'm still not there, forget cost at this point, but I'm still not there on square footage, right? I think we're still. And I think to Denise's point on educational, like, I mean, we could have a K through 5 school like Hopkinton just did for the same money we're looking at doing a 600 grade school. Like it's they're, you know, we're double the cost, the amount of square footage per student as the new Hopkinton school is. So I think that, you know, we need to pare down what we're looking at doing in terms of size. We would be option C1, we would be the largest amount of square footage per pupil of any school MSBA's done in elementary school in the last 75 schools. And
When did Hopkinton open?
2018.
no, the one that they just
The
approved,
new one.
the brand new one,
They
The
just approved it.
Marathon
last
School.
meeting. They just
Elmwood.
approved-
Elmwood is supposed to open, I think, like 6 months to a year before this one.
Yeah, so that's not listed on MSBA's website. But 2018 Marathon School, I believe, was 53 million.
We all know 2018 was a different time frame construction wise.
I mean, so
So
Elmwood
Andrew,
School-
what do you need to hear in the square footage?
well,
The
the-
Air team has sent us the latest chart. I will make sure everyone has that, of where the space is, how it compares to the existing Neary. But I'm trying to think about what we need to do in an upcoming agenda. And we actually have it covered tonight in the agenda in terms of the program, if we need Katie or Larry to pop something open. But I think we need to get the questions on the table related to that now, because obviously it does drive the cost. And, you know, Kathy, we can put a vote on the auditorium as a separate item, because I think you mentioned that already. I mean, that's a huge part of this. But I guess, Andrew, is there anything specific, or do you want to study the detail and come back to the next meeting with questions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought up a few in the last one, which was specifically the spaces that weren't changing from a 305 to a 610, right? The 2 music classrooms, the auditorium size doesn't change, right? There was a few different ones. That I think that was, again, another takeaway that we would, you know, be able to explain, you know, but I think that was where the whole amount of usage per space and the time of it, right? And you know, we want to keep it at 80%, I think was one of the numbers thrown out. Have we gotten on the 305 that everything is at 80%? Are we being efficient with the space? Do we need flex space, hybrid space, etc.? I still think that the 305 isn't a refined enough number for us to have a base case scenario and then compare it to a 610. I feel like the 305 is inflated, so the 610 doesn't look like, it looks like, oh, it's not that much more to get to a 610, it's more efficient. But I don't feel that the 305 is a clean enough number to make that comparison.
So, Arrow Street, what information and where are you at in your conversations with the school administration on that?
Greg, do you have a sense? Because last time we
Yeah, I mean, I
talked-
think that,
Go ahead.
you know, we have gone through the space very carefully to think about, you know, where is there opportunities to reduce. We've reduced the sizes of some of the spaces. But for the educational program, the work that we did with Larry and Katie, kind of minimizing the spaces, we feel is accurate. There is still some question about the auditorium. Obviously, that's a large space in music. And then in terms of economies of scale, you know, when you have a 305 building, you still need rooms for specials, art, music, or language. So there are some economies of scale when you have a larger school where you don't need as much space, and that's where it's gained. I just think also of if you took Neary now, the size it is, it's approximately 58,000 square feet of space used for education. And you multiply that by the 1250, that's still a ton of money. I mean, that's still a large amount of money. My estimate's right, it's probably around 73 million.
Yeah, but that's 20,000 square feet less than what we're at. We're at at C1, right?
Correct, but there are some space, but there's spaces at Neary that we don't have. That doesn't meet our educational programming. And that is the difference.
So I think two suggestions I'd have is in the 305 model, and I think we talked about this last week, in Skanska, you've got to be tracking these open items, like in bringing them back and making sure all the dots are getting connected here, is we should list out on each of these spaces that are being proposed currently and proposed. For example, let's just use the music room because that's come up. How much time during the day in the current space is that used? Is it used 80%, 90%, 100%, or 50%? I don't need to answer that now, Kathleen, but like these are the things that we can easily answer, right? Then we should have a separate column that clearly shows in an ideal educational plan in that 305, what would it be, right? If we had the right space, my guess is it's the same in that situation. I don't think we're being impacted in the music room on programming at this point. I'm happy to be corrected on that. But I think if we show, right, that all of these classrooms are being used 100% of the time, the special ed space, I don't know, right? The music space, I don't know. We'll get down to a refined population for discussion to narrow down where our conversation goes around this. That would be my first suggestion here of how we start to narrow the gap in where folks are at on the size of the building, of the base building. So is that a manageable task for someone to do or some team to do here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is reasonable. I think Kathleen can look at that. The other thing, so I think it is reasonable, Jason.
Okay.
And Jason, the only thing I would add that I think people have to recognize is that there are certain things that if you compare to the current, there's a lot of making do so for example, instruments are stored in hallways right now on shelves all across the hallways, which I'm sure fire department doesn't love to hear. But, there's a lot of like things that happen, like, even working with students that happens in hallways. So people just also have to realize that when you compare to current, it's not ideal in a lot of places.
And that's what I think this should show, right? Is what is base case, like what is current situation and what are you trying to achieve and why? Right. Use those examples as right. And then we'll let the committee react to how viable they think that is or isn't accordingly. Right.
Yeah.
And we'll narrow the conversation around this as opposed to just saying 73 versus 58 or whatever the right number is for comparison purposes.
And I'm just trying to play conversations that I've had from people in town, right? That they're missing that story. And I think Stephanie, you hit it right on the head is, we're doing this is not ideal. But when I have people say, yeah, but we have the superintendent's office there, we're not using one of the gymnasiums, right? And so we're not even using all the space we have now, and we want to go, 30%, 40%, whatever it is, bigger. Why, right? And I think that's the part where, okay, this space is not being used correctly. We have people in the hallway. We have special education classes. I mean, I toured the school, right? The offices in the old bathrooms, right? Not ideal, but I think that's some of the stuff that we're missing in not so much the communications, but in that kind of walk from the current to the new that I haven't been brought along enough to be on board with, if that can make any sense.
It does.
Okay. Marianne, you've been patiently waiting.
So something that I, I'm hearing the concerns, and I think they're all great comments here. And something that's important is as soon as you start a feasibility study, everybody wants the answer right away. What is it going to cost? How big is it, etc. And sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves. We kind of over the skis, but I'm not a skier, so that's probably not a great analogy. But the point I'm trying to make is when you go through the process of the feasibility study, you look at all of the options, all of the possibilities of what's your vision, what's your educational solution for the next 50 years, how do you build in flexibility? And then in that process of that feasibility study, all the different options, some are better than others, you say, does it really support our educational plan? And so right now we're in that process of speculation. And I appreciate what Chris Evers said. I would even maybe say, Chris, that we're not at schematic, that we're still at a conceptual level. Schematic would be implied that we're like 15% into the design. We're not even there yet. We're still in the conversation about speculation. And so you do have to address the conversations that are taking place in town, and looking at scheduling and utilization is critical. But I think if you step back and you say, okay, we're not sure whether it's a 2-grade or a 4-grade option, and then you start looking at what other communities do. What we don't know about what other communities did, for example, is that the MSBA in their space summary requirements, to your point, Jason, about saying, what do we have and what are we proposing? That's in the space summary. And so the question becomes, the MSBA says, well, for a classroom, we want between 900 square feet and 1,000 square feet. That's their requirement. You might think you only need 800 square feet. But the point is if the average classroom is 950 square feet, maybe you have to go right back to the bare minimum to say, well, this is what your ideal educational plan and vision is for the next 50 years. Now, how can we ratchet it back? Well, what's the bare minimum we need? And maybe the exercise, and I'll say this to KBA, is to look at what is the bare minimum to satisfy the MSBA requirements. Because if you don't satisfy the minimum requirements, okay, you're going to get pushback from the MSBA. So I think that, for example, that's a great point. If the MSBA isn't going to support an auditorium, how can we have a flexible space? Is it an auditorium and a cafeteria that has multi-purpose uses? So that's one thing. The other thing is to recognize, and I'm saying this as a professional, that when you have a school that's less than 500 students, you start to run into efficiencies. The more students you have to get reimbursement on, okay, for those common spaces like the cafeteria, the auditorium, the gymnasium, then you have an opportunity to say, yes, this is where we're realizing some efficiencies. But anything under 500 students is an inefficient school. And so that's not to negate what the community can afford. If what the community can afford is a 2-grade solution, then that's where you go. It's not our decision, it's your decision. But the point is we try to show you as much information as possible so that you can make an informed decision. So answering some of these questions happens through utilization and scheduling in the building. How can we be efficient in how we use those spaces? Again, going back to peeling back the spaces. But I think sometimes when you compare what happens in other communities, we don't understand what the rationale was behind their decision making and what other spaces were available. such as fields and things like that, like, oh, well, we can use that auditorium over here. So we don't know that. And so it's not a true read in making the analysis about what's best for your community. So I just want to say is I get the frustration and the questions and wanting to make the right kind of decisions. And guess what? Every community goes through the same process and questions and trying to find a solution that makes sense cost-wise and educationally. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kathy.
So, so Denise, I appreciate what you said a minute ago as far as Chris goes, but I just don't think I'm being clear about what my concern is. I'm not frustrated at all. I'm just trying not to set up a situation where we end up with debt so big and a tax burden so big that we end up truly discouraging people from moving here because of our taxes, or forcing people that would like to live here not to live here. Remember, we're going to have a 30% senior population by the time the school is done. So that's my big concern. I know as well as anyone that we need to replace the school. No doubt about that. I'm just trying to get to the point that we can fit this in and not cannibalize every other project this town needs to do in the next 30 years by doing this. So I'm just trying to get us to the point that we have truly thought through this as much as we can, even if it takes a little bit more time, to Andrew Pfaff's point, to do this in a way that we really think will end up being palatable and not end up with taxes that look just abnormal compared to other similar towns, which is where I think this is heading right now. I hope I'm wrong. And by the way, the Hopkins School, Greg, is only 3 grades. So Andrew and I are both wrong. So it's 3 grades, 158 million, but they're getting a whole lot more MSBA money than we are. So that's going to help them. And plus Hopkinton's twice as big as we are. So they've got a twice as big tax base to absorb it. So anyway, I'm just trying to get to the point. Normally numbers don't shock me. I'm just shocked by the impact of this project. And I'm trying to get to the point that I can get comfortable with what we're trying to present to the town, and I can do it honestly with a straight face and think that in the end, it's the right thing for us to do for everybody that lives in this town.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, so just a comment. I absolutely want to make sure that we create a project that's affordable to the community. And also, also that it achieves the educational program. And that's my role. That's the role of the team, is really to think about what are the educational goals, the finance piece, and how those two align is really important. But what we can't do is we can't, as the educational professionals, say, oh, we're gonna not do we're gonna do without X, Y, and Z, which we think are important to a program, because the town can't afford it. Like, I think that's where the tension can exist. So we will look at the space needs summary. We'll look at what MSBA's requirements are for space, where we're over, where there can be more alignment. So we will do that work.
So, Katie, Larry, Skanska team, should we use the 8th or set an interim date, which I don't really want to do, but we can do it if we need to do it, to focus on program requirements and take an official vote of the committee on the program requirements, and then use a follow-up meeting on whatever design that you are contemplating for purpose of the cost estimates, if you're bought into the idea of trying to accelerate the dual cost estimates, because I assume you'd want us to sign off and it'd be prudent on the base case, right? So if we have half the committee that's on board with a 73,000 square foot 2-grade school, and then we have the other half of the committee that's still saying 58,000, that not going any higher, I don't care, I don't buy the justification from the school administration team, right? That makes your job margin of error, 20 million plus or minus, right? Taking the 15,000 square foot times the rough 1250, right? and then rounding for some of the other costs. So you've heard the conversation. I think everyone wants to try to build consensus here, but I think we need to start with the program requirements, which I realize the school administration team is going to help us with. I don't think that's a long time to turn those answers around, but I gotta imagine it informs all the other stuff you're doing. So welcome where you want to go with this.
I think where we should go is, so Greg, if your team and our team works together on the program, and I think we're going to have to do that pretty quickly because although I know I certainly am around next week, other folks start to disappear pretty quickly, particularly at the school level. So if we can try and set something up later this week and really pound through and try and understand the utilization, because I agree, we want all the rooms to be about 85% utilized. And if they're not, then there's the opportunity if two are at, I don't know, 40%, you can say, oh, great, now I can put two of those rooms together and I've reduced it by one room and I've increased the utilization to where it really should be. I don't know where we'll end up with that, but we certainly should and can try with you guys, sort of roll up our sleeves and see where we get to. And then I would say we continue to draw, because I think, you know, seeing, particularly Andrew, your point, and I think, you know, take the next round of studies, look at them carefully, and then see where we are on the 8th. Meanwhile, we'll talk to our estimator, figure out next and best steps on that side, and regroup then and say, okay, what do we have to show you? What have we got? Where are these questions lying? I think the piece that would be great for folks to maybe send an email to Jason is, what are your site questions that you're worried about? Because I think that's a real big important issue, because right now we're saying that the Neary site really is the site. And if there's stuff that we need to address, we've talked about a perk test, we'll get moving on that. But if there's other concerns folks have, please send it to Jason. Jason, you can send it to us and we can understand some of these lingering questions folks have.
I'm fine with that approach.
Okay.
If next week wasn't a holiday, would you be proposing that we meet as a committee? Or is that too soon? Just forget about the holiday for a second. I'm just trying to get a gauge of like the cadence that you would recommend. Then we'll worry about schedules.
I mean, yes, usually we try 2 weeks because a week turnaround is pretty tough on our end. If we wanted to get together to talk about the program, assuming that we can do the work with Greg's team, I think that could be in a place next week, but the drawings, I think 2 weeks is better for us.
I'm not asking about the drawings. I'm asking about program insight questions. I know you don't know what the site questions are, so it's hard to react to that. So I'll put it out to the committee. Are we comfortable waiting until the 8th for the program requirements? Or if schedules allow, do we want to try to meet again next week? So Kathy's shaking her head no, and everyone else is being quiet.
Well,
Yeah,
I can't meet next week, so I'm to say no because
maybe it's if you
personally,
can
I
send
can't.
it out ahead of time, or maybe we could just, you know, kind of like, if we send you site questions, right, and you compile them, send them to Larry and Katie, and they can, you know, Q&A basically, and then send it out to everybody as homework basically before our next meeting. At least they, you know, could digest it over that holiday week.
All right, so let's do this. Site questions are due to me by Wednesday morning. So any residual site questions that you would like them to answer are due, we'll call it Wednesday at noon. Does that work for everyone?
Is that enough time for them?
No, your questions.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like, because it's.
And then we're sending a written response to those questions next week.
Like you mean this Wednesday, right?
Yeah, so I mean,
Okay.
Wednesday 26th.
No, he means next Wednesday, the day before July 4th, right?
No,
But-
no, 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 no,
No,
no.
he's saying, that's what I mean,
No.
that's what I was trying to clarify. So he
Yeah.
means 48 hours from now, give them the questions.
If any Neary Building Committee members have residual questions that they don't feel like the consultant team has answered related to the site, those questions are due to me by noon on the 26th.
Oh, okay.
So you're just asking questions, right? So, right? So that's, I think we agreed to that. Then I would say Larry and team look at the questions, right? Because you may need, I realize you can't answer them maybe individually. You may need sub-consultants to weigh in. So once you get the questions, I think you come back to me with what your turnaround time is going to be based on what the questions are. I don't think you should commit to a turnaround time until you see the questions, though.
That's fine.
With the goal, with an overarching goal that there are answers to as many of those as possible before the next Neary Building Committee meeting on the 8th.
I think that's good.
That's fine.
And then related to the program requirements, tomorrow, I will send out the latest spreadsheet. Katie, you just need to confirm I have the latest. The committee should review that. We'll have that to review on their own over the next 2 weeks. And then if anything comes out of the conversations between the school administration team and Arrow Street, we'll circulate a second version of that when it's available between now and the 8th. Does that work?
In Arrow Street, just either Wednesday or Thursday or Friday works best for us. So preferably Wednesday or Thursday. So if you can just let us know.
Greg, you're saying of this week. Okay.
You guys can do that offline.
Yes, fair enough.
Okay. So then on the 8th, we'll talk about program requirements, site questions, and get some preview of drawings. And then I think what we need to be willing to do is commit to potentially a second meeting later that week, if necessary, depending upon where we're at, to then think through where we go the following week. We may get to a point, this is my crystal ball optimistic view of the world, right? We may get to a point where you have enough, Larry and team, to go back to the cost estimators with those two scenarios, or we may have opened up a can of worms where we say we need to pause and rejigger the schedule. So right, it could go either way. And we should just let the committee react to what they hear on that night. Anyone not amenable to that schedule? Okay. Let's move on to the open forum tomorrow night. So it's at 8 o'clock. I've heard some positive feedback actually on the timing. I know we talked a lot about that the prior meeting, but people found that pretty convenient to finish their days, especially with school-age children. Greg, have you received any questions yet?
No, we have not.
Okay.
Did we ask questions to be submitted in advance, or did we just say you could?
You could. We'll be ready to react on the fly if we need to. So there's live Q&A plus pre-submitted Q&A. The pre-submitted Q&A was advertised for those people that maybe aren't going to be able to join, but wanted to hear the recording of their answer.
So Jason, where are you getting the positive vibes as far as maybe we're going to have
Just
attendance?
people, I don't, no one, I didn't take attendance, but I do tend to run into a lot of people at sports events and heard certain things around the timing. So
Okay.
they were appreciative of that. Okay, so there will be a short presentation at the beginning. Aerostreet's pulling together a few slides just to kind of update based on what we've talked about as a committee. I will be very clear, especially in light of tonight's conversation, that nothing continues to be set in stone other than we have narrowed our focus to 3 potential options as we've all discussed and voted and put concrete votes around. But obviously that there continues to be analysis around the site, analysis around the cost, and analysis around the size of the building.
Jason, are you gonna make something like the following statement that yes, we've got 3, but FYI, 2 of them are 4th-grade schools and one of them is to significantly rehab and add to what we have, and the others to start fresh. And maybe not intuitively, the 2 of those have basically the same cost so that people can then kind of mull over the fact why you might want to conclude that one's better than the other.
Yeah, and it's in the press release that we've already issued, but I think it's actually more to do the ad reno, at least based on
Yeah,
a
I
last
agree.
cost
It's
estimate.
it's close, so
It's
but I
close.
just think
It's,
I
you
think
know,
it's worthwhile
rounding difference, but
emphasizing that because I
Yeah.
think some people would be surprised to hear that.
yeah. I think it's also worth noting, Kathy, the base repair question, right? I do plan to hit that in the opening because we're in the communications subcommittee did vote on an official answer to, I think we got it in public comment at one of these meetings of why don't we just replace the roof and the windows and, maybe HVAC or other systems. So we do have an answer that we've already voted on in public meeting. So I will address that as well.
Good.
And I guess, and then the communication subcommittee is going to meet, like I mentioned, after the open forum at some point later in the week, if we can get our schedules aligned, to just digest where we go with the open forums. Jim, I know you had, when you had the calendar up, you did have an open forum, unless someone disagrees, I think, if we can leave it to the communication subcommittee to decide whether another open forum is needed, as opposed to having to revote that on the 8th, just so we can get an advertisement out if we think another one is needed. Does anyone have any objections to that process? Okay. Is there any public comment? I have one person left.
Mr. Stivers.
Meeting schedule, I think we have sufficiently covered that. So our next formal meeting will be, I guess, 2 weeks from tonight on the 8th. Mark?
Yeah, can I ask a favor? Can Jim Burrows send out a copy of those 3 pages of the calendar where you've got all the meetings noted? I've got them written down, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure what I wrote down is correct.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely can send it, but as you can tell from tonight, definitely a moving target as
Yeah.
well. I think we've moved most of these already, just based on discussion, but let's pencil them in for now. Go ahead, Roger.
Is that going to be at 7:30 also? Am I hearing that correct, or did we move the time? On the 8th.
I'm at right now 7:30, but I'm open to suggestions from the committee.
I'm just,
Certainly not back, given the size of the agenda already. But if everyone would like to start at 7, we can certainly attempt to do that. Any objection to starting at 7? It may be a long meeting. All right, 7 it is, Roger.
all right, thank you.
Denise?
That was exactly what I was gonna say, Roger, so thank you.
Well, I'd rather have you make the suggestion, Denise, because now everybody's gonna blame me that didn't want to start at 7, so.
Well, you beat me to it.
All right.
Are you gonna do any other business properly brought forth? Have you already covered that?
Nope, that was next.
Okay.
So you have something under that, we can go to other business.
Yeah, I think this one's probably legal. So this is for Mark and Andrew. The finance subcommittee meeting and Jim is going to be at 1:15 on Wednesday, not 1 o'clock.
Okay. Just update the invite.
I will.
Any other business? All right, I will make a motion that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, don't all rush at once. All right, motion is made and seconded. Roll call vote. Denise?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Roger?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
And I am I as well. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night, thank you.
Thank you.